sagging off the ceiling and things like that. But yes, that's a good point. Just for the same reason the paper on gypsum wallboard doesn't burn until it starts to peel away, unless there's extremely intense radiant heat against it.
And would an investigator, either one of you there, again you're working with pictures, would an investigator perhaps have an opportunity to see more detail that could assist him in trying to bridge these two opinions?
Yes. Yes, it's always better to see the scene firsthand if you can.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Mr. Salazar, we'll give you about 10 minutes to finish if you'd like.
I have no further unless you have any other questions.
No questions? I think we kind of interrupted you a little earlier than we had further questions.
This may have already kind of been asked, but just to your knowledge, since you've worked here at the State Fire Marshal's Office, you've already talked about how these standards have changed and how the State Fire Marshal's Office has tried to make sure that its investigators are educated in these changing standards. Can you think of any instance where the Fire Marshal's Office has gone back, and I'm not talking about the Willingham case at all, gone back and reevaluated the previous investigations in light of these advancements that you guys have observed and have incorporated into your investigation?
Well, it's very difficult. I think as Buddy pointed out, and I think from what we've heard, the whole process works. It's a cumulative situation. So to go back and say, well, you know, you used crazed glass just as an example, and say you use crazed glass as the end-all to beat-all, you're not going to find it. You know, it's very difficult. It's a cumulative effort. What we have seen are situations where one of our deputies is going to be deposed. And during the, I guess woodshedding, where we're talking and preparing for deposition or reviewing the reports, they've made comments or made something in the report that's just not valid. They can't support it. And that has been brought to their attention for correction. But the way the process works, and I guess maybe it is a shortcoming, I don't know. We wouldn't know once our reports are turned over in a criminal situation, what the district attorney's office does and runs with at that point in time. It's not our call, it's their call. Once a prosecution is completed, we're pretty much out of the picture. That we're not aware, as in this particular case, we're not aware or advised of any appellate proceedings that are going on, and we're not called upon to testify anymore. That there is no more testimony at that point in time, as far as we're concerned. So obviously, I mean, if and I'll leave it to Mr. Maldonado, if we were made aware of a situation where one of our deputies had made a report that clearly, in a cumulative effect, in its opinion, conclusion, was wrong, I think obviously we would bring it to the attention of whatever officials were necessary at that particular point in time.
When we began this process, long before I got on this commission, I know that you have been in it all the way from, were you involved from the beginning?
Well, yes, I had initial conversations with Mr. Bassett.
Okay.
And then appeared before the committee.
So you've had the opportunity to see a commission that has evolved. This was a commission that was created in 2005. It wasn't funded until 2007. Our first staff member was probably a year after that, and only a few weeks ago we got a general counsel. A few months ago we finally wrote and adopted some policies and procedures, some of which involve making sure that we give notice to the individuals who might have an interest in the investigation that we conduct, which is my way of saying we've begun to develop some process ourselves. do you have any feedback for us about your observations on how, if we had handled things differently in terms of working with your agency, that we might have gotten to today a little quicker?
I don't. Yes, I do. I want to be very careful in my remarks, though. I think the legislature, and looking back, and I've reviewed where you all came from in the legislative process, people with other agendas were trying to create a different, somewhat different commission. And again, you're created, and it's not the commission that other people envisioned. But I would note the original complaint that was filed against us by the Innocence Project was a complaint against our laboratory. And I think there was a reason behind that. I think once a pure reading of the statute, 38, in the code, talks in terms about Department of Public Safety accredited laboratories and individuals and testing. And I don't necessarily know how we fell into that with Willingham, because our laboratory was not an issue. And I think my initial conversation with Mr. Bassett raised that jurisdictional issue, and another jurisdictional issue. As you know, when a statute is created, there is an enabling portion at the end that says the application of the modifications that we are making here apply to, and they will list, and often it's not have limitations.
Right.
And yours clearly had that. I think you were put in a difficult situation, and I think that resulted in placing us in a difficult situation, because we were initially responding when Mr. Bassett and I had our original discussions, and I was talking and the commission had appeared. We were talking about, those jurisdictional issues. Those were, the next thing we knew, you had let out a contract to hire Dr. Beeler. And then subsequent to that, I think what really is the point that I'd like to make is that we got a phone call and started receiving calls from the press wanting us to comment on his report. And we hadn't even received the report. We hadn't had the courtesy of somebody sending us a copy. We had to call and request a copy of the report. So it started looking like, unless we played the game in the press, unless we went out and interviewed and talked to as many reporters as possible, it was purely a matter of what was being presented in the press by one individual, by a certain group of individuals. And that was it. And it left us in a very bad situation. Now, I understand you all don't have the ability, I don't think the legislature has given you the wherewithal as an investigative body to do it with some sort of, they didn't give you guidelines. There were no rules, regulations. We were being charged as an attorney right away. I'm looking at, if I'm being charged, a client is being charged, I want to know what I'm specifically being charged with. We had no idea. We had no idea. And we made requests to the commission at that time. Tell us specifically what are we being charged? Who is being charged? What are we being charged with? We never received any response whatsoever. A wall.
Do you find it a little ironic that you've spent a day talking about the procedures that your agency follows and whether they measure themselves against it, and those requirements are coming from an agency that itself had no process for itself?
It was somewhat disconcerting to see it, and then from there on, once it became supposedly an issue in the governor's campaign, it loses your identities. You're being driven by forces that are outside. It makes it more difficult for you. It makes it more difficult for us. It makes it more difficult for most of the participants, unless you're willing to try the matter out in front of the press. That's your goal, unless you want the issues tried out in front of the press.
Do you find that to be a very good public policy way to get to better government?
I do not at all.
Would it have been helpful, and would it be helpful in the future, if the commission makes sure that when we are even at the point of receiving and even considering a complaint, that we be as transparent as possible with the agency or individual that is the focus of that, to give them an opportunity to decide whether they think this commission even has jurisdiction, to express themselves as to the availability of records and so forth, and just at least in the process of whether we accept it, that we get those agencies involved.
I think it would behoove you and the public, and for limitations of time and the efforts, I think it would be more direct and positive approach. Yes, I do.
I don't have any magical answer for doing this, but do you think it would also inspire more integrity in the process if there were less opportunity for people involved to hold press conferences and talk about their separate agendas?
Just a point of clarification. Just a point of clarification. In the very beginning, when Mr. Bassett spoke to you, that was a very intent to inform.
Well, sir, and I don't mean to cut you off, but it was an attempt to misinform. What I was told in the conversation with Mr. Bassett was he was well aware of the jurisdictional issues that we'd raised, and that not to worry about them, everything's going to be all right. That was the last conversation I had with Mr. Bassett.
When did that conversation take place?
That occurred the day of my appearance in front of the commission.
So that was in a public conversation?
No,
Oh.
I was in a private conversation.
Okay.
And I
your
subsequently
knowledge-
got up and promised to you all we would give you every bit of cooperation we could.
And to your knowledge, was that conversation ever conveyed to other commission members?
I have no idea. We did raise them in letter. Raise them in letter. I think our very
Yes,
first
we got
communication.
that information. Once a complaint has been accepted and we begin a process of investigation, do you have any suggestions for the type of process that would perhaps create more confidence in agencies that are the focus of it, that it is meant to be a positive, improving experience and not some sort of a criminal prosecution?
Well, I think if from the outset the allegation or the complaint is brought forward and there's a clear understanding of who or what specific conduct is being challenged, is being brought to issue, so there's a clear understanding, I think that right there is the beginning point, as opposed to a kind of a, we have no idea.
How could it be a criminal investigation? We have no authority.
I'm not saying it should be, but it might feel like to him.
And the first thing we do when we receive a complaint is provide a copy of that complaint to the agency. And we were doing that long before we had written policies and procedures, just as we talked about the standard of practice and the written standard of practice. You've acknowledged and educated us that there was a standard of practice long before it was a written document, and the same existed with the Texas Forensic Science Commission. I think we could probably spend a lot of time talking about policies and procedures of the commission, but I have a few more questions about the case. So, one of the things, as I was looking on the fire marshal's website to kind of educate myself about what the roles and responsibilities of the fire marshal are, of course I noticed that you have the fire arson laboratory. I was aware of that. And that is an accredited laboratory today, correct? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. We just received recertification. We just got recertified.
Right.
And we're getting new equipment.
By DPS, and then
Yes,
your original accrediting authority is which? Which body? Is it ASCLAG Lab?
ASCLAG.
Okay, ASCLAG Lab. Okay. Now, if someone, this is a hypothetical, so you have investigators producing, looking at the results of chemical testing that may come from your own arson lab, looking at investigative material and rendering opinions. If you have a report that comes from your arson lab, let's say they issue a test report, and the opinion in that report is that an ignitable fluid is present. Okay? and they issue that report, and then later on, through some process, they realize that in fact that ignitable fluid is not present. What happens?
I don't know. I wouldn't know. It hasn't happened.
Well, I can tell you because I've run ASCAD lab accredited labs and accredited labs in general. That lab would be required to reissue a report saying the original findings are not correct and that substance that we reported is not there. Does that seem reasonable?
Absolutely.
Right. And that's the standard that you're held to.
Our lab will be held to.
Absolutely. The state fire marshal, because they have an accredited lab. Would or should the standard be any different for a fire investigator who provides an opinion, just like a chemist that works for you at your arson lab? Should that standard be any different if their opinion changes?
If their opinion changes, if the fire investigator who made the original opinion, if he decides later on that his opinion changed.
Right, based on maybe changing science. Mr. Wood testified that there was at least
Again, I would hope that they would have the integrity to come forward and at least approach me or Paul, their supervisors, and say, here's what's happened, what should I do? Again, it's a difficult situation because the cumulative nature of the investigation report, and then again, once when it leaves them, for them to, I guess what, say 2 years later, I took a course and found out, you know what, and I went back and reviewed it, and I thought after review of that, based on what I know now, I don't know that would happen. I don't know how often our guys go back and review cases.
But you would agree that they would have an obligation?
Absolutely. I think that integrity as a professional would require them. I would expect them to, and I think Paul would. I don't want to speak for Paul, but
that's not a statutory.
no.
Anything else? Sir? Lance? Anything you want to conclude with?
Just, we really want to thank you all. I know it's been a difficult situation for all of you that are new, old, on it. And, as you move forward, I wish you the best of luck. And we really appreciate what you're doing as far as shedding some light. I know as a result of this, good comes sometimes from unpleasurable situations. But I know we've had the opportunity of talking to the Criminal Justice Integrity Unit that's put together a very astute group of people to learn more about arson, to learn more about fire investigation. I know fire investigators all over the state are watching, what happens. And I know the legislature is watching what happens. So I expect good to come from it. We're hoping that, they'll realize the importance of the job that our folks do, the dedication that they do, the difficult job they do, and will provide us with the best resources to move forward in serving the citizens.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I just get clarification on one more issue? I expect we'll have a brief discussion about how we move forward before the meeting concludes, and if we have additional questions,
Absolutely.
can we submit those in writing
Absolutely.
as we put together our
Absolutely.
report?
We'll get them to you as soon as possible. Anything else you need, just contact us. Your staff knows how to reach us. We'll get it to you as soon as possible. We know you want those training records from back. We'll look for those. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We only have one other item on the agenda having to do with whether there are any agenda item requests for the other upcoming January meeting, which is in a couple of weeks. If you have any, you're welcome to voice them now or to pass them on to Lee, and we'll make sure that they get onto the agenda. But we don't have any agenda regarding a disposition of this case today. As we talked about before, we were going to limit today to the hearing and reception of this information. I presume that at the January meeting, one of the agenda items will certainly be what we want to do next with the Willingham case in terms of trying to generate a report and a conclusion to it.
we would automatically have that hearing committees.
Right.
Of course. So
That's true. The investigative committee is always on there anyway, so that puts it on the agenda, but we'll make sure that there's wording that covers that allows us to come together. We're adjourned.
Legislative committee.
All of those are standard. Those are standard.